Hi, I've been building agentic research applications for financial research for about 600 hours now, and I thought I'd share my top 5 insights that I really wish I knew in the beginning of building these applications. Let's get into the first one. I realized that the quickest way to get a hold on figuring out what is making sense or not in your app and what is real friction points or not is not only to talk to your users, but also become your user. And why this is the case is that I realized that, for example, in the time when I was at Amazon as a data scientist, I realized that we could build up really nice evaluation frameworks. We could figure out like pain points really well. We could build out some, figuring out of like, will this increase accuracy or reduce bias? But at the end of the day, what really it comes down to is also kind of getting a hang of what are the frustrations when it's actually in production, which a really good evaluation framework should be picking up. But I think that's a really tricky thing to do. So as an example, in this case, when we're talking about financial research application, there might be certain things and concepts that, for example, you might want to understand. So I try to apply this to myself. I, for example, am not sure what SEC Edgar means. So I try to just use my application and try to see if this gives a good answer for someone that doesn't know anything about this yet. So in this case, I give the example of that I'm a tech background type of a person, explain SEC Edgar in a simple way. And in return, I can then assess, is this application giving this answer in the way that I would actually understand or not? So by doing this, I realized that it just really often comes up and becomes a quite good way to figure out, like, is it slow? Is it giving incorrect answers? Because you're also not seeing the just in, let's say, like a metric, but actually feeling the latency. I think for me, at least, has become a much more efficient way of figuring out if this actually is a pain point worth dealing with or not. Because sometimes also I realize that customers might not also really fundamentally want to tell these things because maybe they feel like, this is maybe not a too high expectation to have or something similar. So, of course, talk to your users. We're going to get into that in a bit, but definitely become your own user because you'll get even better closer to the pain points that you have. Next up, I realized that often of the times, at least for myself, I get quite excited about solving, let's say, like the big problem of, let's say, giving a really good quality, sophisticated answer to a really complex question. But I'm realizing more and more that taking a step back, really figuring out what are the problems that they're dealing with day to day along this, let's say, larger problem of, let's say, wanting a really good answer to a complex question. There might be certain problems that are underlying here that actually is going to help you solve the bigger problem. Giving an example for this is, for example, that the garbage in, garbage out principle very much applies to LLMs. We have the prompt engineering side of things. And we're realizing that some of our users was a little bit unsure of like how to actually ask these questions. And we had a workshop. We did prompt engineering, so they went through the whole thing. But at the end of the day, the problem wasn't really that, like, not only that maybe they would want to understand more about it. The problem was that it just takes a bit of time and friction on their day to figuring out, like, well, I have this question and I want this to be just digestible for an LLM or an agent here. How do we do that in a better way than me having to spend time about thinking about these things because the users have other stuff to think about. So the solution in this case could be here then a very simple thing, which is a prompt optimizer. You have a framework that you set up that, like, this is something that you would want it to be doing. You can give an output. So in this case, you can, for example, see here that, like, in this case, we had the question of, was it SEC Edgar? Explain it simply to someone who just joined the finance from a tech background. You can just have a little simple one here, add the prompt itself, click optimize prompt. And all of a sudden, this type of an output, even though it might not be a pitch perfect output, there might be something that is missing, but then you can build on this as well. So you can have, for example, like the optimized prompt itself. You can then show them that, like, these are the things that we could be having as an optimized prompt. We might also have some actions to improve it. In this case, it says that there's no real actions to do it. But in this case, we basically then come back to what is the problem from our users. Don't make it always about just solving the biggest, most complex problem, although they are very fundamentally exciting. Figure out what are the real pain points, solve those, and go from there. Next up. something that just comes over and over again, I'm realizing, is that it's very often, at least for me, interesting to look at, let's say, like LLM benchmarks to figure out if a new, let's say, model release like GPT-5 is something that is worth putting into production. You might spend hours researching, even before you have even put the model to its test. Some people have gotten really good at this. I've been learning around it and got a much more kind of like appreciative of this framework now, which is that, yes, you can have like, look at these blog posts or benchmarks that get put out, but at the end of the day, the only thing that really matters is your own internal tools and benchmarks that you test for your own application. Because again, if there's something that works on a benchmark, it might not still be necessarily working for your own tool itself. So as a quick example, if we look at a little bit of code, is that like we can have, let's say, an agent that we want to be able to do two things. So let's say that we want to be able to do like regular web search, and then we want it to be able to do, let's say, some Reddit search, because we maybe want to be able to go connect directly to the Reddit API and get raw sources rather than trying to scour, let's say, whatever Tavily finds with their internet search tool. We initialize an LLM over here. We create a little React agent. We add the two tools. And then in this case, we give it a little bit of a system prompt that says, you're a helpful assistant helping the user with their requests. If the user asks for information about Reddit, use the dedicated Reddit search tool and link the URL from where you retrieve the information from. Otherwise, for general web search, use the Tavily search tool. So then we try to call it. So let's say that we try to run this call and get back a response. In this case, let's see if we can do what is the current view of LangChain according to people on Reddit. We can run this query. We can get a markdown output of our response after we check what it happens. And the key thing here then is that if we're testing, let's say, like how it's managing different tools, or if we're testing, let's say, like a new, let's say, Reddit tool or something like that, even if it has a good benchmark score, at the end of the day, if your application is getting worse from it, that's again the only thing that matters. So going back to just seeing like, okay, did it do the things that we wanted it to do here? It did link the references that we saw. It did say based on the current recent Reddit search tools. Okay, but then let's see also like what tool did they actually go for? Did it go for the, let's see, did it go for the Reddit search tool? Yeah, Reddit search, here we go. So it found this one. So in this case, we could see that like it was able to pick it up, and then we can then start debugging and checking if that actually has a valuable improvement to ourselves instead of, let's say, using just the web search itself. So back to it, evaluate it based on your own internal product rather than just looking at the benchmarks themselves. Next up, tracing tools I found to be really, really great. In this case, I use Langsmith because I use a couple of the LangGraph and LangChain agents. But again, I don't think this is an important setup. If you find Pydantic's tracing tool instead to be better, could not really see any sort of like tangible, valuable difference as of right now. Maybe that Pydantic's version has that you can query it with SQL. I don't know if LangChain or Langsmith had that already, but besides the point. The core part here that I want to kind of show you is that like, although tracing is quite nice, so let's say that we have like a conversation where we're like trying to figure out like what is the best way to do calculator actions in LangChain as of today. Have people, in the industry had better results with making it a dedicated tool, or like, basically see like how do we add calculators, let's say, to our agentic application. We can have that here. We can look through the whole thing and see where things are going right or wrong. But also like what I've realized is that like you also have a very important valuable asset in your setup with your application, and that is your end user. So often what I really enjoy doing is that maybe, let's say in this context that you have some sort of like, a primer on LangChain that maybe I want to have here. Instead of just analyzing the outputs and everything from the Langsmith tool, is that I also add the agent reasoning in a step down here. So the person that is querying this can then go down here and see like different nodes and see if it's something that is, outputting correctly. And it can also see like, is there some part of this that is actually doing it better or worse? Which means that you actually get, for example, for complex research, someone that is close to the actual answers and might know more than you. If you're doing finance, or like a financial expert, or if you're doing like, legal stuff, you have the actual kind of lawyer that maybe looks through this. You can have someone that actually helps you pinpoint where it's going right or wrong, unless you're your own subject expert within this as well. Long story short is that this part has really made it much more improved for me to be able to help debug things, because I can work more easily with the end user, figuring out what has gone right and what has gone wrong, which improves the time to actually fix these things and make the user experience much better, much quicker. Next up is, I've realized that when it comes to submitting feedback, I have not really aced this part yet. Whatever I've learned so far, though, is that it needs to be as frictionless as humanly possible. And then after that, when you've implemented a way to give feedback, validate how this friction actually feels with the user. Why I'm mentioning it as friction is because when you're, let's say in my case, learning about SSC Edgar, and let's say I'm wanting to say that like, oh, this answer was good or not, the user still already has gotten all the value here. So you're basically just asking for a very kind favor for them to say, did this do a good or bad job? And if they're going to do you that favor, the thing that we're going to have to do in return is to make that as simple as possible. And my way so far has been two different ways. One is a free flow submit feedback that I can just dump into like a JSON object and send it off to an S3 bucket. And then you can tell what is good or bad with it. And then also at the bottom of it, I think it might be disappeared on this one right now, but you can have a thumbs up and thumbs down button. And what really becomes important here is that when you're doing these things is that you have, let's see, anything that is easy to analyze. So I would say specifically binary features. If something is good, give it a 1. If something is bad, give it a 0, or subpar, whatever you define with your user. That's the thing that has been really much easier to figure out if this is like, a cluster of good versus bad stuff, because the user don't really understand. And I'm pretty sure that there's a person from, I think, Stanford that did a check on this as well, on evaluation of LLMs, where you basically have a problem if you do gradings that I started off with, where you have a score, let's say from 0 to 5 or 1 to 5 or something similar. The user really don't, in an ad hoc quick situation, have time to think about, is this really a 3 or a 4 or a 5? Maybe they know the 5 because that's like, the best answer. And maybe they know a 1 because it's the worst. But what makes it a 2? What makes it a 3? What makes it a 4? They need to have like so much cognitive load to figure out what that is and why that is like, a separation of them. So for me, I would really say make it as frictionless as possible. In this case, let's say a binary feature of yes or no, and maybe a free flow text if you want to do more. But then also, more importantly, when you've implemented this, really talk to them. Getting the feedback with, let's say, like a binary thumbs up and thumbs down probably is not going to be the final thing that actually makes you understand your product better. So try to figure out a way to talk to them at a normal cadence, let's say like every week or something similar, and you can kind of get the gist of, is this answer giving the right things? Because they might not be having the time or energy to actually write that out to you as well. So talk to your user and make the feedback frictionless. Those were the 5 points that I had. I hope you enjoyed this video, and have a good one. Cheers.